E depois saber que o nosso governo não será um governo do PT. É importante, Gleice Hoffmann, você que é presidenta, saiba. Nós precisamos fazer um governo além do PT. É preciso que a gente coloque nesse governo. Aliás, já fizemos o primeiro. O Meirelles não era do PT. O Meirelles foi eleito o deputado mais votado de Goiás, desistiu do mandato para ser presidente do Banco Central. O Marton Babacho nunca foi do PT, o Celso Amorim nunca foi do PT, o fulano nunca foi do PT, o Miguel Jorge nunca foi do PT. Tem muita gente que nunca foi do PT e participou do meu governo, e vai ser assim. Não será um governo do PT, será um governo do povo brasileiro, além do PT, além do PT.
All right, so we're diving deep today into this documentary project called Opulsar Da História.
Okay.
And we've got some pretty fascinating stuff to work with. We've got the filmmakers' notes, like their background info, plus some raw footage from a political rally in Brazil.
Wow.
During the 2022 elections.
I see.
It's really a look at how documentaries are trying to capture these like really intense moments in history, especially with all the stuff going on with, you know, the rise of the far right globally.
Yeah, it's a really potent combination of sources. You know, we're talking about Brazil, a country that had a very heated election back in 2022.
Oh yeah.
With Bolsonaro representing the far right and Lula on the left.
Right.
And this footage, this rally footage, really gives you a sense of just how high the stakes were.
You can feel it, right?
Yeah.
And you can feel that tension too. In the filmmakers' notes, they're calling the project Opulsar Da História.
Okay.
Which, if you don't speak Portuguese, it kind of translates to the pulse of history.
Okay, I see.
They're trying to document how Brazilian society is responding to this surge in far-right ideology.
Okay.
And it sounds like they want to get really up close and personal with it.
Yeah, and that's where this observational approach comes in. Okay. It's not just about capturing the big events, the sound bites. They want to show the stupidity, the good, the basic human elements, you know.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like a fly on the wall capturing everything without judgment.
Okay, so let's unpack this observational approach a little bit more.
Okay.
What does that actually look like in a documentary? How does that differ from, say, a documentary with a narrator explaining everything?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about showing, not telling. The filmmaker becomes almost invisible.
Right.
You know, letting the events and the people speak for themselves. You get this more raw, unfiltered view, which can be really powerful.
Right.
But it also means the viewer has to do a little more work to interpret what they're seeing.
Interesting. So they're trusting the audience to draw their own conclusions.
Exactly.
And speaking of conclusions, the filmmaker's notes suggest that the far right is very good at using distraction to their advantage, like they're playing a kind of psychological game with voters.
Oh, that's a really key insight,
Yeah.
The filmmaker points out how they manipulate people's desires for success, for money and status.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a magician, you know, using misdirection.
Right.
They get you focused on one shiny object, and while you're distracted, they're pulling the levers of power behind the scenes.
So essentially, they're diverting attention away from critical issues that might hurt them if people paid more attention.
Exactly.
Issues like social justice, equality.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just a Brazilian phenomenon.
Right.
I mean, the filmmaker explicitly calls out Argentina and Chile.
Right.
And of course, we've seen it, you know, in the US with Trump. In the UK with Boris Johnson.
Wow.
It's almost like a global playbook for the far right.
It's a little unsettling, honestly.
Yeah.
So is this distraction just about promising people wealth?
What?
Or are there other tactics at play?
It's multifaceted. You know? Sometimes it's about stoking fear, creating this kind of us versus them mentality that we might point to an external enemy or threat to rally support, deflect from their own shortcomings.
It reminds me of that saying, the best way to unite a country is to find an enemy.
Right, exactly.
Like, sadly, it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
And you know what else seems to be working for them?
What's that?
Social media.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The filmmaker talks about how social media is used to spread fear and hate to create these apocalyptic narratives that make people feel like the world is ending unless they vote a certain way.
Yeah, and it's not just about spreading information, right? No. It's about creating these echo chambers where people only see what confirms their existing beliefs.
Right. The algorithms show you more of what you already like.
Right.
And pretty soon you're trapped in a bubble.
Right.
Where dissenting voices are just silenced.
And you know what? We're actually seeing that play out
right
now in the rally footage.
The
speaker in the footage is making all sorts of accusations about Brazil's Supreme Court and the media.
Yeah.
They're saying the system is rigged.
Oh, jeez.
The media is lying, and only Bolsonaro can save Brazil.
Wow.
It's classic fear-mongering, designed to make people distrust anyone who disagrees with them.
Which feeds right back into that us versus them mentality.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember this isn't the whole story.
Right, you're right.
The documentary also aims to capture the resistance movements pushing back against the far right.
Okay.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Exactly. The filmmaker mentions filming a diverse group of activists, academics, artists, people who were using their voices to challenge this wave of far-right ideology.
That's powerful.
There's even mention of Noam Chomsky making an appearance.
Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Right.
He's like the godfather of modern-day activism.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about street protests here. We're talking about intellectual resistance.
Challenging the very ideas that underpin this far-right movement.
Right, and I think it speaks to the filmmaker's commitment to showing multiple perspectives.
Right.
Even those that might be controversial.
Speaking of the filmmaker, their background is pretty impressive.
Okay.
Over a decade of experience creating documentaries.
Wow.
For the BBC, RTTV, Al Jazeera. They even worked on a film about Lula himself.
Wow, so this isn't their first rodeo.
Not at all.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And it seems like their experience has led them to believe in the power of dialogue.
Right.
Even amidst strong differences.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's this quote from their notes that I love.
Okay.
Where they say, different positions can be motivating, even fun.
That's great.
It's like they're saying, hey, we don't have to agree on everything.
Right.
But let's at least try to understand where each other is coming from.
Yeah, and that brings us back to you, the listener.
How do you engage in productive dialogue in your own life?
Yeah.
Especially when you're faced with viewpoints that you might find challenging or even offensive.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where everyone seems to be shouting their opinions from the rooftops.
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, can help us find a way to talk to each other, even when we disagree.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
That's a good goal.
Yeah.
All right, so.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely a skill.
Oh, for sure.
We could all benefit from honing,
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the potential consequences of not having that dialogue. Those accusations we heard in the rally footage about the Supreme Court, media.
Yeah.
Those aren't just words. They shape how people see the world.
Right.
And ultimately how they vote.
It's like that whole idea of alternative facts, right?
Yeah.
We've been hearing so much about that lately.
If you repeat something often enough, even if it's not true, it starts to feel real.
Exactly.
And then it becomes harder and harder to have a productive conversation.
Yeah, and that's where the filmmaker's emphasis on observation feels almost like a counterpoint,
Right.
They're saying, let's step back from the rhetoric, the spin, and just observe what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy.
I imagine it can be pretty messy.
Right.
The filmmaker actually uses the word stupidity to describe some of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder, is there a risk of normalizing or even glorifying some of the negative aspects of this political movement by simply observing them?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's a tightrope walk for any documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
How do you show the reality of something without inadvertently endorsing it?
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the filmmaker's focus on capturing a wide range of perspectives is key here.
You mean showing the resistance movements, the people pushing back against the far right.
Exactly. And even within the far right movement itself.
Okay.
The filmmaker notes that there are diverse motivations.
Oh, interesting.
They describe it as a space where some people are trying to find a place, where to put their own ambitions, while others genuinely desire the best for Brazil and Brazilians.
So it's not just about good versus evil, left versus right. It's recognizing that people are complex. And their motivations are rarely black and white.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes this documentary project so fascinating. It's not trying to offer simple answers or demonize one side. It's about understanding the forces at play, the individuals caught in the crosshairs, and the potential for change.
That makes me think about the resistance movements we talked about earlier. What do we know about them from the filmmakers' notes? Are they all united under one banner? Or is there like a diversity of approaches?
The filmmaker doesn't go into a ton of detail. But they do mention filming an event. With like a wide spectrum of activists and personalities, you know. From what we gather, there's a shared desire to protect democracy and human rights. But the approaches seem to vary. Some are focused on grassroots organizing, others on legal challenges, and still others on using art and culture to counter the far-right narrative.
And then there's Noam Chomsky, right? What's his role in all this?
Well, the filmmaker mentions him attending an event. But they don't elaborate much beyond that. It definitely piques my curiosity, though.
For sure.
Chomsky is known for his critiques of power structures.
Media manipulation. So I'm guessing he plays a role in challenging the dominant narratives surrounding the far right.
It almost feels like a subplot. Within the larger documentary. You've got this, like, intellectual heavyweight stepping into the ring, adding his voice to the chorus of resistance. Makes me wonder if the filmmaker will focus more on his perspective or use him as like a symbolic representation of a certain type of resistance.
And that's where the observational approach gets really interesting.
Right.
Will they just let Chomsky be Chomsky, allowing his words and actions to speak for themselves? Or will they try to weave his presence into a larger narrative?
So many possibilities.
Yeah, for sure.
It really highlights how this filmmaking style is all about capturing these little moments, these unexpected interactions, and letting the audience piece together the bigger picture. Exactly. And it's not just about showing us what they see. It's about showing us what we don't typically see. The filmmaker mentions how all the major media outlets tend to use the same sound bites, same talking points, creating this kind of homogenized narrative.
It's like we're all getting the same prepackaged version of reality.
Exactly.
And it's hard to see beyond that.
This documentary, on the other hand, aims to offer an alternative perspective, one that delves deeper, that goes beyond the headlines and into the hearts and minds of the people caught in the midst of this political maelstrom.
It's like they're saying, hey, there's more to this story than what you're being fed. Come with me. Let's explore the nuances, the contradictions, the unexpected moments of humanity that make up this complex reality.
And it sounds like they're doing this with a real sense of urgency, too.
The filmmaker talks about how this feels like a pivotal moment in history. They specifically mention the rise of figures like Trump and Bolsonaro, coupled with the global upheaval of the pandemic as being a bit of a wake-up call.
It does feel like things are changing rapidly. And not always for the better.
What kind of wake-up call do you think they're trying to deliver through their work?
That's a good question.
I
think they're trying to shake us out of our complacency.
We've
gotten so used to the 24-hour news cycle, the constant barrage of information, that it's easy to become numb to it all. But this documentary seems to be saying, hey, wake up, pay attention. The choices we make now will have a real impact on the future.
I think that's a really astute observation. They're not just documenting events. They're trying to make us feel the urgency of this moment.
And they're doing it by showing us the human side of the story.
We see the passion, the anger, the fear in the rally footage. We sense the filmmaker's own struggle to make sense of this complex reality in their notes. It's not just a detached analysis. It's an invitation to engage emotionally with the issues at stake.
It's like they're saying, look, I'm grappling with these questions too. Let's figure this out together.
And that brings us back to that idea of dialogue, even though we're talking about some really heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Political extremism, social media manipulation, the fragility of democracy. There's a glimmer of hope in the filmmaker's belief that dialogue is still possible.
That even in the face of these seemingly insurmountable challenges, we can still find ways to connect with each other, to understand each other, and maybe, just maybe, to build a better future together.
It's a powerful message, and one that I think we could all use a little more of these days.
I agree.
Yeah, it really is powerful.
And you know, it makes you think about the power of documentaries in general, right?
Yeah.
They can take these huge, complex issues and make them feel so personal, relatable.
Right, absolutely.
A good documentary.
Yeah.
It doesn't just, inform you.
Right.
It makes you feel something.
Right.
It can challenge your assumptions, make you question what you thought you knew, and even inspire you to take action.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to society.
Oh, right.
Showing us the good and the bad, forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
And in doing so, they can spark these important conversations.
Right.
Bridge divides that seem impossible to cross.
Yeah.
And maybe even plant the seeds
Right.
for a more just and equitable future.
So what does this all mean for us?
Right.
The viewers, the listeners, the citizens, trying to navigate this increasingly polarized world.
I think it means that we have a responsibility to engage,
Right.
to be informed, to listen to perspectives that are different from our own.
Right.
We can't just passively consume information,
Right.
especially in an age where misinformation and manipulation are so rampant.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Yes.
Discerning consumers of media and active participants in shaping the future.
Exactly.
We want to see.
And that's one of the things I find so compelling about Opulsar Da Historia.
Right.
It's not just a film.
Right.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's asking us to wake up, pay attention, and get involved.
And it's doing it in a way that feels both urgent and hopeful.
Absolutely. It's acknowledging the darkness, the challenges.
Yeah.
But it's also highlighting the resilience.
Right.
The resistance.
Yeah.
The people who are fighting for a better world.
It's that balance that makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not sugarcoating anything, but it's also not giving in to despair.
Exactly. It's saying, yes, things are tough, but we're not powerless. You can make a difference. Yeah.
We've explored the making of a potentially impactful documentary, gained insight into the complexities of Brazil's political landscape,
All right.
and even touched on how these issues play out on a global scale.
It's been a journey for sure.
It really has.
And it leaves us with a lot to think about.
It really does. But here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Imagine if the filmmaker was given access. What story would emerge about how we as individuals grapple with these complex forces?
Right.
What would it reveal about our hopes, our fears, our capacity for critical thinking, and meaningful dialogue? It's something to ponder as we continue our own journeys of understanding and engagement in this ever-evolving world.
Well said. It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
O movimento que mais cresce hoje é o movimento que pede, no fundo, o Brasil que nós queremos de volta, o Brasil fiel a si mesmo. Muito obrigado a todos que estão aqui e vamos lutar, vamos agir e vamos rezar para que o Brasil seja livre dessa seita vermelha que quer voltar ao poder. Muito obrigado.